Did you know that for the most part, almost every situation, when you file divorce, you are both liable for all of the debts that were incurred during the marriage? So if the wife grabs the Family American Express and goes and buys 10 Chanel purses, and then the husband goes off and buys himself a Ferrari, what are you saying in that situation?
The husband now owns 10 Chanel purses and the wife now owns a Ferrari. Can they jointly file for bankruptcy?
Absolutely. That is one of the benefits of the bankruptcy code. Each person can file individually or they can file together. What if I told you that your husband or your wife's bad business decisions and bad spending habits also affect you even when you're filing divorce? Did you know that for the most part, almost every situation, when you file divorce, you are both liable for all of the debts that were incurred during the marriage? That means that all the credit cards, all the business loans, anything either one of the spouses signed for, you are both liable for that. Welcome to another episode of Motivational Esquire. My name is Diego Mendez. I'm a bankruptcy, foreclosure, and debt lawyer here in Miami, Florida. And today I have a very special guest, one of the most preeminent family law, divorce law attorneys in the state of Florida, my good friend, Jeanette Watkin. Hello.
Hi, thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming today. I'm very honored that you're here because you have so much experience on what we're talking about, which basically is debt and marriage and divorce. Tell me something. We have a situation where a man or a woman has a business and they've accumulated all kinds of debts during the marriage, credit cards, signature loans, loans on property that they own together, and all of a sudden there's a divorce. So what happens in that situation?
So it's such an interesting topic because people don't realize that what they both spend, they're both going to be liable for. So if two people are married and the wife is off on a spending spree and the husband is off on a spending spree, they're both liable for each other's debt at the time that the divorce comes. So if they haven't paid off those debts and they continue to accumulate, when the divorce comes, they're both going to be liable for both of their debt, all of it. And if it's significant, then the parties may be more in debt than they may have assets. So that's the part about divorce. Do they have more in debt than assets, or have they spent so much money that their assets are so small that they have more debt than asset? It's important to understand that they're liable for all of it. So whatever they accumulate, they will both be liable for. So it's important for them to be careful what they spend, because in the end, there's going to come a reckoning day. Someone will have to pay it off, and that is going to be both of them spending and paying off the debt.
So if the wife grabs the Family American Express and goes and buys 10 Chanel purses, and then the husband goes off and buys himself a Ferrari, what are you saying in that situation?
Great example.
Yeah.
The husband now owns 10 Chanel purses and the wife now owns a Ferrari. Now they both get to split it. Regardless, now the purses don't have a name to it. The car probably has a name to it, but they're both going to share in those assets, right? It's important also to purchase assets that are going to have a value at the end of the day, because the debt is going to continue being the value that they purchased the Ferrari and the purses. So they both own all of it.
And they own all of the debt together.
Absolutely. Together, they own all of it.
So if, let's say the husband can't pay for the Ferrari in that situation, or the wife can't pay for the 10 purses, and they owe American Express $100,000 because of that, who pays for that?
They both pay for it. So if the American Express is in the name of the wife, right, she will have to make the monthly payments, the minimum payments. She's going to have to be paying for it. Now, if she can't afford it, that's another issue, but they're both still on the hook for that debt. And something that's important is that when the dissolution of marriage is filed, that day is a very clear cutoff date for determination of assets and liabilities. So after the filing date, each party is responsible for their own debt. But prior to the filing date, they're both on the hook for everything.
Oh, so you're saying once you file the divorce, if she keeps buying purses or if he decides that now he wants to buy a Porsche, those new assets and those new debts aren't marital.
Absolutely. That's why that cutoff date is so important when you file for divorce, because it cuts off both assets and liabilities. So if the husband wants to buy 5 Ferraris, he's on the hook for it. If she wants to buy another 20 purses, she's on the hook for those after the filing. Before the filing, they're both liable for everything.
Okay. Does that also apply to real estate? Let's say that the wife decides to buy a condo, which is a little love shack that she was using during the marriage, and it's only in her name. And they file for divorce, and then the husband finds out about this love shack condo. And what happens in that situation with that property?
Well, the property was owned prior to the filing.
Yes.
So because the property is owned prior to the filing, assuming that it was purchased with marital assets, it's going to be a marital asset. So for example, let's say the property, the little love shack, she purchased it for $200,000 and there's $100,000 debt, a mortgage, and there's $100,000 equity. They share that equity. So they'll both be entitled to $50,000, let's say, of that love shack. So even if it's in her name, even if she purchased it without his knowledge, they're both entitled to it. That is if it has equity. If it's in debt, let's say she purchased it like during the mortgage crisis, right? Let's say she purchased it at a certain value and then it went down and there is no equity, for example. They would both be liable for the debt, even though he didn't even know that she was purchasing it. And that's the beauty of family law. Like, you're in it together and you're marrying this person. So you need to know what kind of financial customs they have. Are they a big spender? Are they frugal? It's so important to know who you're marrying, because that's the kind of divorce you're going to have. You're going to have, if your spouse is a big spender, you're going to have a big debt at the end of the day. If they're frugal, you're going to have a little debt and you're going to have more assets. So it's very important to know who you're marrying because of this issue.
Okay. So the marital home, I think there's a misconception out there where they say, oh, I'm going to get the home. I'm going to get the family home. And it's almost like, okay, but somebody has to pay for that if there's a debt on it, correct? So in that situation, who pays for the marital home? Let's say the wife keeps, because usually, if there's children, many times the wife keeps the marital home, correct? Who pays for that?
Well, that's a really interesting question with a lot of different ramifications. So generally speaking, right, if there are other assets, if the marital home is the only asset, right, and it has debt, usually it gets sold, because if it's the only asset, they should both be entitled to share in that equity so each one can purchase their own home, right? But if it's the only property, most likely the court will divide it. Now, if there are other assets, right, then you can divvy up, and there's a brokerage account. Maybe the husband gets the brokerage account and the wife gets the equivalent value and keeps the home, right? So if there's more assets, it's easier to divvy up the assets where the wife can keep the home. Now, it's important to remember that whoever keeps the house has to be able to keep up with the mortgage and the taxes and the homeowners association. So it's not a good idea for, let's say, the wife to keep it if she can't afford it. There has to be a mechanism for her to keep it, because many times their names are going to be on the mortgage. So that's a whole other issue about taking off one party's name off of the mortgage and all of that. But with regards to dividing those assets, most of the time you can divide it and the wife could keep it if there are other assets to compensate the husband and if she can pay for the mortgage and other debt. If she can't, it really doesn't make sense to keep her paying for something that she can't afford.
So basically it's not a free house. This is not, a lot of people think that when they get divorced, when they say I'm keeping the marital home, literally means I'm keeping the marital home and somebody has to pay for it, not me. Somebody has to pay for that, correct?
Absolutely. Somebody has to pay for that. And usually it's the person who's keeping the home. They have to pay for it, either through alimony or whatever, or their work. But you don't get, there could be a situation where the husband agrees to pay his alimony via the wife keeping the home, but that's really not usual because it doesn't really make sense for, let's say, one party to pay alimony and all the expense of the home. Usually each one keeps their own debt, right? Going forward, each one's going to have their own financial responsibilities going forward. As any two people getting divorced, like sometimes there's not enough money to keep the house. So each one will either get what they can from the house and rent their own. And each one is going to continue making those financial responsibility and payments for their lifestyle. So if you have a couple who's making, let's say jointly $100,000 a year, right? They may not be able to keep the marital home, which costs, let's say $5,000 a month to pay, because it's not financially feasible for either of them. So many times they both need to sell the marital home and each one's going to have to pay their own way through their work or whatever. So usually speaking, they each pay their own way going forward, which it could be through alimony or other ways.
So here's a controversial question, specifically the marital home. A lot of times the money to purchase the home, which was purchased during the marriage, came from one or the other. There's no agreement prior to the marriage. There's no prenup. The husband or the wife puts in $200,000 to purchase a home, and now there's a divorce. What happens to that initial $200,000 investment?
So the $200,000 investment that you're referring to is a premarital monies from, let's call it the husband, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So in Florida, once you jointly title a property in the name of husband and wife, there's a presumption of a gift. So if you take your premarital money and you put it in a property and you title it jointly with your spouse, you have gifted your spouse one half of those funds. So it's going to be very, very hard to rebut the presumption of a gift. There are ways, of course, to rebut the presumption, but it's really difficult. Generally speaking, after you've purchased a property, you start paying down the mortgage, you start making expenses on debt and things like that. And it's going to be very, very difficult to get that money back. And it's really a gift.
So the person who invested the $200,000 just gave the spouse, and now the ex-spouse, a $100,000 gift.
That's right. They just gave him a $100,000 gift. That's right. So let me ask you a question, Diego.
Okay.
Can parties who are husband and wife, when they're married, can they jointly file for bankruptcy?
Absolutely. That is one of the benefits of the bankruptcy code. Each person can file individually or they can file together. Many times there's people who are contemplating divorce or going through a divorce and they're told file together because that eliminates a lot of the debt that you have. And that way the divorce becomes a little bit easier. That's not in every case. And there's definitely situations that doesn't apply, but that does happen. So a couple, depending on how amicable they are, and if they're on the same page of what they're trying to do, can file together. And if they qualify for a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which means they get rid of all their debt and pay nothing, that helps them because now they're only dealing with in Florida, the homestead, which is absolutely protected from all creditors. In many cases, that's all they have. So they can get rid of Amex and Chase and all kinds of other debts, and then only deal with the marital home, which means if it's sold, it's divided without having to pay any other debts. And that helps. That helps alleviate some of the financial pressures that people have.
So if they're not anticipating divorce, they can still go through the bankruptcy process to alleviate all the debt that they're carrying from, let's say, luxurious trips or, going out to dinner often or credit cards, student loans, any of those.
Bankruptcy is for the honest debtor. It's for the unfortunate debtor. And in this situation, it'd be the unfortunate couple that have put themselves in a situation. Depends on their income, depends on other things. But yes, in theory, most people qualify for one type of bankruptcy or the other. There's different chapters for different types of income, different types of situations. But yes, if they can't afford this, and they've overwhelmed themselves. The whole idea behind bankruptcy is to give you a fresh start. And in this situation, to give the family a fresh start, a couple a fresh start. People that have gotten themselves in bad situations can file bankruptcy, get rid of all kinds of debt that they can't handle, free up money for their families, for their kids, and then start over. And you can't file over and over and over again. So Chapter 7 is every 8 years. So you have 8 years, hopefully you never file again. But in theory, you get this amazing gift from the government, from the federal government, says, okay, all of your debts are gone, they're discharged, and therefore you can move forward in your financial life, and all your future income is yours. You don't have to share it with your creditors, with the family, basically. It all belongs to the family.
So if someone files for bankruptcy, is there any sort of like repayment of, like if I'm spending a whole bunch of money on my credit cards and then someone files for bankruptcy, they can just get another credit card the month after bankruptcy and they'll give it to them?
There are credit cards for people that have filed bankruptcy, yes. They're low limit, $500 credit cards, and the people use those to rebuild their credit. Most of my clients, I've had thousands of clients, most of them rebuild their credit pretty quickly. Some of them come back after 8 years because they got themselves back in the same situation. But yeah, there's credit cards, and credit card companies, what they do is they charge you more interest. You don't get low interest credit cards, but you get credit cards because they know you can't file again. So you're a pretty good risk, and you have no other debts. You don't have $80,000 of credit card. You have $1,000 of credit card. So they give you another $1,000 credit. It doesn't hurt them, so they just give it to you. Yeah, but most people rebuild their credit very quickly.
So is it 18% that the credit cards charge them after?
It's more. Sometimes it's even more than that, depending on, what it is. But yeah, 18% is the maximum in Florida. But I mean, the credit cards go up to 29%.
I mean, that should be an incentive for anybody not to be using their credit card. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea behind bankruptcy is you have to take a little course before you file. It's to teach you how not to get back in that situation. It shouldn't be treated lightly. You should do this as a last resort if you really truly can't pay. And the thing is, a lot of people, couples, they reach the point where, look, if you miss one credit card payment, a 30-day, you miss that one payment, and let's say you had a bunch of low rates, when you do that, all of your rates go up to the default rate, which is a 29%.
Wow.
So your minimum payments go from like $300 a month, let's say, to $1,500 a month.
Wow.
And when that happens, they can't pay it. So it's like a house of cards. You take one card out and the whole thing collapses. And most people, it takes one late payment for that to happen to you. And when that happens, there's really no choice. I mean, what are you going to do? And it sucks, but that's just what it is. It's a terrible situation to be in, but it's our system. Credit is an honor system, which means we pay on time. They give you credit. You can buy whatever you want. They don't care what you buy. There's no limit on anything. You can buy anything you want, but you have to pay them. So, and if you don't pay them and you don't pay them on time, it's not just a late fee. It's the late on your credit report. Remember, credit card companies are constantly checking your credit behind the scenes. You don't know, none of us know about this, but they know what you're doing. And the second that you are late on any credit card, all of your rates shoot up. They all do the same thing. And that affects, and they lower your credit limits and they raise your rates. So now you can't spend on the credit cards anymore, and your rate goes up to 29%. Your minimum payment goes triples, quadruples, and it's like a trap, and you're done. So just don't be late. Never be late. Never be late. That's the beginning of the end.
And you mentioned something about homestead. When a couple files for bankruptcy and they have a house and they've placed the homestead protection on there, can you explain how that house is protected from that bankruptcy?
In Florida, we have one of the most generous homestead, I think the most generous homestead laws in the United States. And what that means is the primary residence, someplace where you live, is protected from all creditors except the ones you agree to, meaning your mortgage and if you do work on the house. But for the most part, nobody can take, American Express can't take your house, Chase can't take your house, lawsuits, people get sued, they cannot take your house. Therefore, nobody can take it from you. They can't put liens on it. They can, the IRS in some situations can, and if it's criminal restitutions, they can. But everybody else is SOL. So, Jeanette, bottom line, the debts are joint. When you get divorced, both parties owe the money. What is your best advice for people that are thinking about getting divorced or about to start the process?
So my best advice with regards to debt is just limit the amount of debt that you have during the marriage, because the goal is to leave the marriage with assets, not to leave the marriage with debt. And there's so many cases where they leave with debt and no assets. And that's really a bad position to be in going forward. So my best advice is limit the amount of debt that you have during the marriage. Pay down those credit cards, pay down those loans, so that when you do get divorced, your assets will be greater than your debts and you can leave with a fresh start.
As I understand, debt is one of the most destructive and the most painful parts of divorce. I think it's one of the reasons why people get divorced, because of the financial issues that people face. I think it might be the number one reason that people get divorced. Some people consider filing bankruptcy to get rid of the debt. In my opinion, it's not a bad option, and not in every situation, but it depends on the couple's financial situation, and you, in many times, can deal with it through the bankruptcy, or obviously through a trained and very experienced family lawyer who can help you do that, to navigate that very difficult path, a very painful path.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. You need to be able to limit the amount of debt that you have in order to just go forward. I mean, who wants to live with debt? Who wants to eat out of a tuna can because they can't afford to go to a restaurant, right? No one wants to live that way. So everyone should be able to manage the debt, especially when you're married, because it's not just you making the expenditures, it's your spouse. So they need to have those conversations on an ongoing basis to figure out, hey, are we spending too much? Are we spending too little? Can we go out, once a week? Can we afford that? So that they can live within their means. It's really very difficult to live beyond their means and then get to the point of a divorce and be like, oh my God, I didn't even realize we had all this debt. Because at that point, it's too late. You really want to do it. You really want to address it while you're still in time to save your assets, right? To not spend more than what you have. And the best way to do that is have conversations with your spouse and be like, can we afford this? Can we afford a trip to the Bahamas? Can we afford a trip? Can we do those things and have those discussions together and not just do them unilaterally? Because then, like I said, it's too late. And then you're dividing debt when really what you want to do is dividing assets.
So bottom line, when you get married, you share in love, you share in family goals, but you also share in debt. Any debt that you get into while you're married belongs to both of you equally. So be very careful about what you do when you're married and what kind of debt situation you and your spouse get into. Have conversations about it. Understand that this debt is going to affect you for many years until it's paid off. Thank you very much, Jeanette. We had a very beautiful conversation today about debt, a very difficult subject for people to manage, especially during divorce. I really appreciate your help, your guidance, your wise words on how people are supposed to handle this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and to respond to these very difficult questions. And, sometimes people just need a little guidance as to what to do in those situations. So thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. Stay tuned for our next conversation with Ms. Watkin about other divorce-related debt questions and situations that will affect you in your life and your family's life.
Para quererte.